Green banners waved in the breeze as crimson leaves shuffled, a reminder to tower residents that Earth still retained beauty and serenity within a dangerous universe. Laughter echoed through the Hall of Guardians, a rare moment of joy between the prickly Vanguard leaders. Hunters stood in lines by the vaults as they struggled to choose which cloak they must dismantle, while warlocks traded war stories in the cantina, unaware of the eye rolls cast their way by titans nearby. Typical moments from a typical day above the last city. The white-haired but youthful merchant Tess Everest finished a transaction at her post facing out over the city where the traveler hung still, eternally restful. A particularly raucous and mismatched flock of birds came careening over the railing, something Tess wasn't used to seeing. Very few species of fowl ever bothered to fly up to her perch atop the tower. As Tess stepped out of her stall and made her way towards the railing to follow the birds as they bickered, a gust of wind shook the banners that stood proudly as a representation of humanity's last stand. Tess felt odd and cold. The wind was always crisp at this altitude, but as another gust picked up and the birds screeched and dove out of sight, it became clear to Tess that they weren't bickering. They were moving with some other purpose. Fleeing. The air became colder still, and Tess looked skyward to see a rippling blue streak of energy cut through the sky above. It vanished before she could confirm what she had seen, but it was enough. The skiff appeared before the words escaped her mouth. "Dropship!" As Tess turned and ran towards the stairway leading down to the Hall of Guardians, more skiff apparated into the sky, appearing after flashes of energy as they warped in close to the tower's rooftop platform. Then, a boom, and a ketch began materializing, still high above but sailing towards the landing. Tower patrons came to the windows and gasped in horror. Vendors fled their posts and followed in Tess's hurried footsteps. Terrified civilians cried out as Guardians tried frantically to gather and protect everyone in sight. The invasion had come so suddenly, no time to prepare.
Whatever happened to just getting some rest?
The ghost floated to and fro near the doorway of the small apartment. It was a cramped but sparse room, clearly hinting that its occupant rarely spent much time there. Along one wall hung sets of warlock armor, one reminiscent of the Vex, another infested with the Siva virus, the others of Hive origin. All had seen battle. On the thin bed sat a warlock. Underneath faded war paint, his eyes were tired and red. The ghost floated closer and twisted and turned in his usual quizzical way, analyzing the warlock whom with he had spent every moment over the past 3 years.
Whatever happened to just enjoying yourself?
The two had seen more than anyone in the universe could say since they first became inseparable on that fateful afternoon in the Cosmodrome. It never needed to be said, but at this point, they were one unit. Neither would or could continue without the other. The ghost had seen the warlock in this mood enough to know exactly what he was thinking, but the conversation had grown tired.
Is waiting such a bad thing?
The warlock looked down. On the floor at his feet laid a yellow and blue pulse rifle. It hadn't been fired in months, but had been held quite often, whenever this powerful guardian found time to stop at his closet-sized home in the tower. "I'm just ready for the next clue," he finally replied.
Understood, but the Exo hasn't shown her face for a while. We've scoured every buried temple on Venus, killed enough Fallen to wipe out a generation. It's time we turned our focus elsewhere.
The ghost was sincere, but worried. "It's time for the next step. I'm going crazy waiting around for something to happen. At this point, I'd be glad to experience real danger again." The ghost could only look down, as ghosts do. Slowly at first, a low rumble could be heard coming from somewhere above them. The warlock and ghost looked at each other, then down at the rifle, which vibrated and slid across the floor as the apartment began to shake. Without another word, the ghost dematerialized, and the warlock was off. The sliding doors instantly parted in front of the warlock to reveal a tower platform void of any life. Dust filled the air and stung his eyes as he adjusted to the light, looking outward at a sky filled with a fallen ketch and more skiff than he could count. As he gazed out over the railing in shock, a large airship began to fill his vision. From mere meters in front of the tower, a second ketch floated directly up and into view, its engines filling the air with a warm, electric energy that ripped the proud banners off their poles, throwing them against the far wall until they tore over the roof of the tower and out of sight. The roar of the ship mixed with the tower sirens caused him to buckle, experiencing sensory overload. As he caught his breath, he looked up to see the fallen troops drop down off the ketch and onto the tower's surface. The first time he'd ever witnessed unwelcome visitors at his home. Still paralyzed by sheer amazement, the Warlock observed a Kestrel-class AX careening wildly towards him, its back engines engulfed in flame. Crashing forcefully into the postmaster's stand, he watched with wide eyes as it exploded a few feet in front of him.
"Move, Guardian,"
grumbled a deep and raspy voice. The Warlock was shoved towards the central steps by a firm hand, and he didn't turn around until halfway down the staircase, when a defensive shield flew over their heads and sealed them inside. Turning, he was face to face with Banshee 44, the cantankerous gunsmith. "What's happening?" asked the Warlock, not knowing what kind of answer he expected.
"The end,"
replied Banshee. Just like that, the gunsmith headed down a corridor, cut off by a closing door, exiting as quickly as he had entered. The Warlock debated pursuing him only for a second, but soon realized he was now surrounded by hundreds of panicked and alarmed tower vendors, guardians, and citizens.
Make your way towards the emergency exits. Citizens of the tower, it is imperative that you cooperate to ensure that all of us make it out alive. Guardians, arm yourselves and prepare for battle.
Commander Zavala's booming and steady voice echoed. The tried and true leader of Titans stood on the Vanguard's table looking out over the frantic crowd. At his feet, Ikora Rey, Master Warlock, worked frantically at her station to gather what information she needed and eliminate the rest. The look on her face betrayed her thoughts. She wasn't planning on returning to this haven anytime soon, and wasn't about to let the Fallen find what they came for. Bang. Bang. The Fallen were above them. Deeper into the Hall of Guardians, Crucible Quartermaster Arcita 9940 stood at his usual spot, only now his weapons are free of charge. Guardians stood around, handing out auto rifles and shotguns back through the crowd behind them, ensuring that everyone would be equipped to face whatever was smashing down the doors at that very moment. Cade 6 leaned against Arcita's stand, spinning the cylinder on Ace of Spades and loading it with ammo. Ever the professional, he remained calm and collected, somehow relaxed. Arcita noticed the gun.
"Cade, are you not a Vanguard? Surely you don't plan on participating in the fight?"
He took an extra second to respond. "No, of course not," and gave the chamber one final spin before handing it off to a young hunter, who looked up in surprise as the legendary fighter walked away. Bang. Bang. The security doors wouldn't hold much longer.
It is of the essence that we move quickly. Make your way to the lower hangars and to the base of the tower. There is no fight here. We are vacating.
Boomed Zavala, who finally hopped down from the table and prepared for his own exit. The Warlock pushed against the current of the crowd and approached the table. "Are we ready to defend ourselves?" His tone was urgent.
"There is no defense today, Guardian. Their numbers are too great,"
replied Zavala, not looking up at the soldier he had relied on so heavily over the past years. "All due respect, Commander, but we have faced much—" He couldn't finish before the Madam Vanguard interjected.
"No chance, Warlock. We should have seen this coming, but we did not. We're to retreat to the exterior base at once. The tower is lost,"
said Ikora, and she meant it. The Warlock paused before finally replying, "I'll buy us time." Commander Zavala finally looked up. He glanced over the Warlock's shoulder with a concerned look, then,
"You are valuable to our war. I shouldn't have to remind you of that. If you don't make it out of here alive, I see little hope for our future."
It was perhaps the biggest compliment Zavala had ever given another living being, and the Warlock realized the profundity of that statement immediately. As did Cade, who stifled a metallic cough in his surprise. Feeling bolstered, the Guardian turned without a word as his ghost materialized over his shoulder.
You really are looking for an adventure, aren't you?
The glowing light quipped. Behind him, the large table surrounded by the Vanguard split into two and opened down its length, revealing a staircase that led below the Hall of Guardians. Without wasting any more time, Ikora Rey, Cade 6, and Zavala made their way down the steps, swallowed by the table as it resumed its original form. Bang. 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 Steadfast, the Warlock observed the hall in front of him, now barren, the walls stripped of weapons. He reminisced for a moment on the countless armies he had single-handedly eliminated, but in the silence, the desperation felt by everyone who had gone below finally hit him. This was real, and this was happening. The tower would fall this day. Bang. 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 The security doors crumbled against an unseen brute force, and immediately down the steps poured a clacking and screeching army of dregs and vandals. A scout rifle materialized in the Warlock's hands as his fingers subconsciously latched onto the trigger before, not like the others, had even solidified. The moment it did, he fired. Dreg heads began popping as the expert marksman became one with his weapon, every bullet a confirmed kill. Reloading in a flash, the onslaught continued, but Dreg bodies created quickly growing piles left and right. Vandals ducked and weaved, but were still met with ammunition that struck them down before they made it more than a few meters down the hall. The Warlock advanced as he fired, moving calmly and intentionally towards the wave that bore down on him. The first wave slimmed but grew closer as more Vandals pushed forward with their blades drawn and shining. As the closest Vandal leaped, the Warlock almost invisibly withdrew his shotgun and put shell upon shell into the sword-bearing fallen soldiers, their bodies flying backwards, bowling over unfortunate Dregs who stood in their paths. From his palm came an orb of void energy, splitting off into particles that tracked down Vandals behind cover, exploding and vaporizing them into purple sparks. Vandals that got too close to the Warlock were met with a flash as he sent them into nothingness with the powerful force of his melee. This was his element. This was what he was meant to do. Blood and body parts flooded the room, riddled with bullets, but all the Guardian could see was the radiating light that burned inside of him and propelled him forward, sharpening his senses. There was no thought, only action. The Fallen bore down but could not harm him. He was unstoppable. From out of sight at the top of the stairs came a low, animalistic grumble. A few more rounds from his scout finished off the last of the wave, then the Guardian reloaded and readied himself for the approaching threat. Down the stairs and into the hall stepped a menacing fallen Kell, cloaked in black with asymmetric spikes and horns protruding from his head and shoulders. His left eye was gone from its socket, his right burned black. As his cloak billowed, the Warlock attempted to catch its insignia, but the fallen symbol was completely foreign to him. This was not a Kell of the House of Devils, or Kings, or Wolves. The Warlock shook off the confusion quickly, regaining his confident composure. Ghost, do you think we've got enough room to fire off a horn in here?
I don't know if I recommend.
Too late. A shining iron Galahorn appeared on the Warlock's shoulder, and with a howl, a rocket shot through the Hall of Guardians towards the Kell, who continued his steady approach. Just as the projectile was about to find its target, the Kell held up a clawed hand and formed a space. It wasn't void, it wasn't energy, it was just dark. A small space in which nothing existed or could exist in the palm of its hand. The rocket approached and in an instant disappeared, followed by a deep cackle. The Warlock swallowed, and then the Kell spoke.
You are the Guardian who has sent legions running. The Guardian who has struck fear into the hearts of Hive Gods and disrupted the unending path of the Vex.
Nearly struck speechless, but summoning all the courage he could muster, the Guardian replied, "Some even say I have become legend."
Your story ends here. A powerful darkness has come to blot out the light of the Traveler.
Without waiting for a response, the Dark Kell summoned a jagged and twisted blade, gripping the heavy weapon with both upper arms, and moved forward, bearing down upon the Warlock. Out of options, the Guardian planted his feet, holding tight to his rocket launcher but bracing for the worst. Raising the blade above his head, the Kell aimed to strike down, moving with the force of a guillotine. With a heavy clang, the blade struck an ancient iron shield, held firm by an imposing titan with a broken horned helmet. Lord Shax took the full force of the blow on his shoulder as he hoisted one of the shields he ripped from the wall.
Move! Now!
Regaining his senses, the Warlock clambered to his feet and sprinted for the windows on the far end of the hall. Under the strain of the Kell, Lord Shax spun out from underneath with a fist rippling in arc energy aimed for the Kell's jaw. Caught off guard, the fallen leader staggered back, only to retaliate with a fury. Shax backpedaled, trading blows, shield to sword, until the mighty relic was torn from his hands, skittering across the floor. But the Titan wasted no time, heading towards the Warlock with hurried strides. From the Guardian's hands came a glowing purple light as he hurled a cascade of void energy at the windows, shattering them just seconds before they leaped into the sky. Landing on a balcony nearly 100 yards beneath the windows, the Warlock and Shax both caught their breath. Rushing to the railing, they looked out at a sea of transport ships hurrying away from the tower in a mass exodus. On the ground, Guardians young and old fought off an onslaught of fallen troops that had approached from within the city. Looking back up at the window from which they had jumped, the Warlock equipped his scout rifle, but a heavy hand clamped down on his shoulder.
Fight forever, Guardian, but not here.
The Warlock nodded, finally accepting defeat. Looking out over their home, for what could be the final time, the city's last defenders sighed as they dematerialized while their ships passed quickly over their heads. The 2 fighter-class vessels jetted off after the transport vehicles, the last of humanity's chance, now on the run.